It's time for another edition of English with Andrews. And today's class, what I'd like to do is start to teach you about how to write an effective interpretive essay for your English class. Okay, what you've been asked to do is to interpret a piece of literature and say something about what it means, right? So how do we start that? Well, first off, let's talk about the differences between just simple plot summary versus commentary versus analysis, which is showing how something means. That's where we want to get your thinking to get to, okay? But before we get to the depth of the essays, we certainly also need to know how to write a good opening paragraph. How do we start the darn thing? So we're going to begin there today for a couple minutes. In our next video of the series, we will talk about writing effective body paragraphs. So let's go ahead and get started today with opening paragraphs and part one. Here we go. So when you're writing your essay, what is your purpose of your essay? Do you just want to say what happens in the story, writing kind of a summary? Well, the problem with that is you have to figure that the teacher or audience reading your essay has already read the same piece of literature you've read. And they don't need you to tell them what happens. They already know. But the thing is, you are going to need to recount some of the details in order to say something about the story. You just don't want that summarization of those details to take over and be pretty much what your essay then is about. So it's kind of the lowest order of thinking, just kind of restating in your own words what happens. The next higher level of thinking would be the commentary, where you actually have an opinion, you've got a topic you're talking about, and you're saying what you think about it. And certainly that's going to be more interesting than just giving a summary of some story. Now we're actually hearing your ideas. So this is a higher order of thinking. However, it still lacks the substance we see in a good essay. And a good essay is going to include analysis. Now, what an analysis is it's going to contain summary and commentary, but it's going to do so in a way that creates a very persuasive argument about something's meaning, okay? So for an analysis, you're not just saying what your opinion is on the subject, but you're saying how the text gave you that opinion. What is it in the text itself that gave you that interpretation? And you're going to show and explain that to your reader. Think about like if you were in a automotive class and you wanted to explain how the internal combustion engine creates vacuum pressure. You would have to open the hood of the car and start pointing at certain valves and tubes and things running around in the engine in there to explain the process. So it's a very similar kind of thing when you're writing about a story or a poem. You're going to need to point to things that are actually there in the text to show what they're doing. Now, the highest order of thinking, of course, would be evaluation, where you're actually judging whether the piece you've read succeeds in doing what it was trying to do. Of course, if you have evaluation, you need to base that on analysis for it to be persuasive. Okay, now, the typical essay structure, a lot of students wonder, well, how do I fill a 400, 500 word essay? What do I understand I have to talk about my ideas and talk about the book, but how do I organize it? So here's a very basic way to structure it. Your first paragraph is very important because it's going to provide the background and the context for your topic. What the topic is simply the subject you're talking about, okay? Which is, it's more than just the title of the text, but it's also that aspect of the text that you're going to discuss. And then that first paragraph also is going to contain your opinion on that topic. So what's missing here? Well, you got maybe a little summary, maybe a little commentary, but what's missing is you're not going to have any analysis in that first paragraph. We're going to save the analysis for the body paragraphs. Okay, and that's where in those body paragraphs where you're going to show and explain what parts of the text actually lead to the interpretation that's there in that claim you made in that first paragraph. And in those body paragraphs, you want to strive to use and explain your evidence in a very persuasive and systematic way, all working to develop a central line of thought. We call that your thesis or your main assertion. And you want to arrive at a final destination so you're not leaving things hanging. So today we're just going to talk about that first paragraph and look at some examples. So let's go ahead and proceed. Now, some of you have maybe read the story, The Theft of Persephone. And so here would be an example of an opening paragraph that would be considered very weak. Let's read it together. The myth, The Theft of Persephone, is about how the seasons on Earth came to be. It tells the story of kidnapping and sadness and is also tied to such things as sunlight and farming. Okay, so let's talk about what's good about that paragraph. It has the title, and it has certainly a subject matter from the story, which is how the seasons came about. It even has a little bit of plot summary in the second sentence. But as we can see, it's not really developed with any kind of a central claim that's very interesting beyond just stating the obvious. So this would be a very weak opening just because of how thin the thinking is here. Somewhat better would be this second example. Let's read it together. The myth, The Theft of Persephone, touches on the theme of motherhood by detailing the way Hades kidnapped Persephone, breaking her mother's heart. Demeter, as an earth goddess, pines away in sadness, causing the earth itself to become infertile, and the humans then suffer. The story does a good job showing that a people should not be ripped away from the lives they know and forced to live where they don't want to. Okay, so what's good about this? Well, it has some textual details that are more full and more developed than we saw in the very thin first example. It does have quite a bit of plot summary in those first couple of sentences. It doesn't really, it says there's a theme of motherhood, but I don't know what that means. What do you mean by theme of motherhood? A theme has to actually be a complete thought, not just a word, right? And the student here also tries to do some evaluating in the third sentence, saying that it does a good job, but it hasn't really focused on a central idea that is getting to the deeper meaning of the story. So this one is more typical of what I would see in most high school student essays, kind of a struggling paragraph like this that leaves us with a lot of questions still about what the essay is about. Now let's look at a strong example on the same subject. The myth, The Theft of Persephone, tells the ancient story of Hades' kidnapping of the lovely Persephone and the resulting sadness experienced by the girl's mother, the earth goddess Demeter. The oldest god, Rhea, works out a compromise wherein Persephone can still be on the earth most of the time, saving the day for the humans who depend upon a happy earth mother. While the myth is understood to explain how the earth's seasons came about, its deeper meaning is in teaching that everything is cyclical: life and death, light and darkness, happiness and sorrow. As such, Demeter's cyclical emotions are a metaphor for the experience of life itself. Wow, now this is kind of typical of what we would see in an A-plus essay. It's doing some deep thinking and going beyond just the text to actually think about the metaphorical, deeper meaning of how it represents that everything that comes goes back again, and that life's kind of a cyclical circle of things getting repeated. So here we have seen how we've made a claim, and it's a deeper claim. It's not just on the surface. It introduces the topic and the story, and it does a lot more than just summarize.